Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Free Press, live once again, and happy Halloween.
Oh, happy
I didn't even
Halloween.
realize it was Halloween until I saw people dressed like lunatics on the subway. I was like, what is going on? We are coming to you live, as always, from the Free Press newsroom in Midtown Manhattan. I am Michael Moynihan, and back with me, as always, well, not always, but mostly, opinion editor at Newsweek, Batya Ungar-Sargon. And here with us today, to my left, on your right, Il Duce, the Free Press founder, the boss, der chef, the Bruce Springsteen of this office, Bari Weiss. Bari, welcome.
He's contractually obligated
I
to
am.
say all
I
of it.
try to, if I pump it up a little more, I get a little more money in my
That's
paycheck.
right.
And today, I mean, this show today
I would
is
say it's
outrageous.
packed.
Traveling Wilburys level of outrageousness. So many stars. Abigail Shrier will be here to break down her investigation, an insane story, into anti-Israel indoctrination of students sweeping American public schools. That's not an overstatement. Catherine Herridge, you know Catherine, she's going to be here to discuss her bombshell report, which found that federal law enforcement agency knew the Hunter Biden laptop story was real and prohibited an investigation ahead of the 2020 election. And one of my favorites, my dear friend Coleman Hughes, is coming here to our studio to talk about a controversial referendum in Puerto Rico, designed by the Democrats and local pro-statehood politicians, that has sparked accusations of political manipulation. And rounding it out, as if you deserved more, people, Peter Savodnik, the great Peter, is here to join us to discuss his brilliant piece on the, quote, abandoned Americans in two devastated Rust Belt towns, each championed by a different political party. All right, but to kick off our Free Press Live spooktacular, do I have to say that? It's a spooktacular?
Yeah,
no one approved
whoever
that
wrote that, you're getting a bonus.
Getting a bonus, and I'm getting fired. We are going to start with Joe Biden, who is apparently, Batya, the president. I was not aware of this. He's apparently still the president. Tell us about it.
He is still the president, and on Tuesday, President Biden reacted to the comic Tony Hinchcliffe's set at Trump's Madison Square Garden rally, in which Hinchcliffe joked that Puerto Rico was a floating island of garbage. And here is President Biden's response to that. Take a look.
The other day, a speaker at his rally called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage. Well, let me tell you something. I don't know the Puerto Rican that I know, or Puerto Rico, where I'm in my home state of Delaware. They're good, decent, honorable people. The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. His demonization of seen as unconscionable, and it's un-American. It's totally contrary to everything we've done, everything we've been.
Oh, dear.
There you have it. Half the country, according to the way this is being read, is garbage, according to the president. Here's how the media spun the story, however. Apparently, it all comes down to a silent apostrophe. Take a look at a few of the headlines from New York Magazine, the LA Times, CBS, and the Washington Post.
Yeah, that's pretty much what you expect.
It's, you know,
By the way, for those who covered it
embarrassing.
at all, there was a lot of people who didn't cover it at all.
I do have to say, I was watching CNN yesterday. They were pretty upset about it. They were calling it, you know, Joe Biden's deplorables moment.
Yeah.
This is how it's being read by a lot of people. Now, I'm going to sort of play against type and
Defend
I'm
him?
Here we
going to
go.
surprise you guys a little bit. I
Jeez.
think that the problem
You're voting for
with
Kamala.
this is not
She's
that
subtle and hard to read.
I don't think President Biden meant to say that, you know, half of the country is garbage. I actually do think that the interpretation with the apostrophe makes a lot of sense. He was clearly talking about
God.
the comic himself. However,
Wait, hold on. Let's just stick on the apostrophe for 1 second. Because I might be too stupid to understand even the spin, because it seems like such a stretch to me. They're saying that he is saying that, say it to me with the silent apostrophe.
I think
Say
that
it.
I don't know.
'Cause I don't
yeah.
even understand it.
Okay, I'll explain that. But I think, first of all, it's obvious that he was sort of struggling to articulate what he was trying to say, right? He garbled the
bit.
words. He was sort of stepping over his words. What I think that the media is interpreting him to have said, and by the way, I don't think it's correct for the media to be doing this in headlines, right? They should just present what he said. They kept calling it his garbage comment so as not to have to say what he actually said. They're saying, he said, the only garbage I see is his supporters.
The garbage of the garbage of his supporters.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I do think like people are making too much of this. It wasn't like Hillary's very intentional, analysis of what exact percentage of Trump supporters are deplorable. But what I want to say is this. I think that the reason this is so outrageous is not because a very old and potentially senile person misspoke. It's that he accidentally admitted unintentionally what Democratic policy towards the working class has been effectively for 40 years, which is to treat the kind of people who vote for Donald Trump, who are working class people, like they are garbage. That is what NAFTA did. That is what defunding vocational training did. That is what opening the border does. It signals to people who work with their hands for a living, you are garbage. These are not jobs that an American should do. These are jobs that a slave does who is enslaved to the cartels, who does not have citizenship. And I think that's the real outrage here, is that President Biden, in misspeaking, because I do believe he misspoke, accidentally revealed the truth about Democratic policy vis-a-vis the working class.
Your ability to tie that into NAFTA and the border, genius.
It's amazing.
Genius. To me, it's like the comparison. If you look at the press's reaction to, is it Tony Hinchcliffe or Hinchcliffe?
Hinchcliffe, yeah.
To Tony Hinchcliffe, who, by the way, I thought was, I had never heard of him before the Tom Brady roast. I think he's absolutely hilarious. But their reaction to his joke was absolutely histrionic. It was like, this is a Nazi, the supporters are Nazis. I think AOC called it a a January 6th in miniature. These were hate rallies. This joke amounted to a hate crime.
Right.
And then the President of the United States, like it's the weighting of the joke of an obscure comedian who's taken completely literally and seriously.
Sure.
And then Joe Biden says it, and you have the press basically doing the job of the White House spin.
What does he say? Notice what he says, very, very specifically. He says a speaker at the rally. It wasn't a speaker, it was a comedian. That is a different thing. There is an intentionality when you're a speaker. I am saying you people are garbage, full stop. If you're making a joke, you can say the joke doesn't land, you can say the joke is inappropriate, but it is a joke. The point is to make people laugh. Maybe he didn't do that. It got I think a decidedly mixed reaction in the room. But that's the first thing. The second thing is when you see this stuff on the apostrophe, does it remind you of anything? That where the press wasn't so generous with the apostrophe. Donald Trump, they're rapists. They are rapists, or they're sending us their rapists. The rapists that they're coming from. They're sending their rapists because they're emptying the institutions, which was clearly what he meant.
I have not heard close reads like this since English class in my freshman year.
That's why you watch this show, because we will break down the syllable by syllable.
Gerunds, floating participles. It's incredible.
But I think that's kind of a thing. Is like I get what you're saying, Batya. I can see that he's saying, because the garbled thing. I mean, good Lord, we're focused on that. I mean, he goes into, this doesn't represent the Puerto Rico that's in my state of Delaware.
Well,
and I'm like,
he meant the Puerto Ricans,
of
right?
course.
Yes,
The thing is, we have a president where every half a breath we have to figure out what he meant. Right? Donald Trump, you say, well, don't believe him. Watch what he does, not what he says. With Biden, you just have to kind of try to interpret what he's saying, because half the time I don't know what he's saying. And that was a real unforced error, a stupid own goal. I don't think it's going to actually make much of a difference, but it's.
I agree with you, but let's talk about what Trump made of this, right? Because Trump's next move was, I think, totally brilliant. So what Trump did as a result of this was...
No, I'm sorry, no one can disagree with that.
Yeah, no, he dressed up as a garbage man.
He dressed up as a garbage man. He commissioned a garbage truck.
Yes.
He
bragged about how
Trump
it made it look
made it look
nice.
Yeah, it was great.
And then
it was brilliant.
he pulled up to his rally in a garbage truck, being like, I am proudly part of this coalition, which, by the way, probably includes a lot of garbage men. Probably a pretty, strongly Trump demographic. The thing is, I think he may have planned that before, because there had been this meme circulating. I saw it on Instagram. It was doing bonkers in terms of just being shared. And the meme was, it was a map, and the map was of America, and it was all red. And the caption was, the Electoral College if Donald Trump works in a garbage truck next, after the McDonald's stunt.
Yeah.
And so basically, I think when I first saw this, I saw that it was Vivek Ramaswamy who was on the garbage truck, and I was like, he's very online. He definitely saw that meme and thought, oh, let's
do it.
just do it.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then suddenly you get to the front of the truck and there's Trump. So I think this is one of these examples of how online culture is sort of bleeding out into the campaign in reality. But of course, the thing about Trump as the garbage man was the same thing as the thing about Trump as the McDonald's worker. He was, of course, cosplaying, but he was doing it with such pride, signaling again to these people that the Democrats have treated like garbage for so long, like there is nothing to be ashamed of. These are jobs that I'm proud that you do and I would be proud to do as well. And I think that's what wearing the tie while doing it signifies.
The weird thing about Trump, I remember in 2015, 2016, when I went to the first Trump rally I went to in Iowa, and I remember looking at people saying, this kind of working class shtick, I mean, the guy's a billionaire or presents as a billionaire, this is kind of odd. But when you think about it, look back to these famous moments in political history where people do things that make them look silly. Michael Dukakis in the tank, for instance, is like this little Greek guy from Boston with a huge helmet on, like looking around. If you put Kamala Harris in situations like this, it would look unnatural
Right.
and strange. There is something about Trump, despite the fact that he is a billionaire or worth quite a bit of money and grew up quite rich, that in this situation, it doesn't look weird to me. And maybe I'm wrong about that, and maybe it's just a perception that I've had that I've built in my head. But when I see him do these sorts of things at McDonald's, I just think if Kamala Harris did that, it just would backfire.
Because he's
There's a personality to it, I suppose,
He's
too.
completely disinhibited
Yeah.
and loose. And she is completely inhibited
Correct.
and nervous. And so even when you put her in what should have been a layup, like that
Yeah.
SNL sketch that they sent into the Catholic dinner where she was with Mullah Shannon.
Yeah.
It was one of the cringiest things I've ever seen in my
They did a
life.
30-year-old joke.
But it was just so uncomfortable.
It was uncomfortable, yeah.
But I don't. Yes, he's a billionaire, but he is so despised by the elites, and so it's the strangest thing to me that you have on one side a candidate endorsed by literally every superstar, every celebrity, every Beyonce and Taylor Swift and Mumford and Sons and Gracie, like Bruce Springsteen, name it.
Yeah.
The other side has My Pillow guy and
Hulk Hogan.
Yeah.
and he might win.
That's terrifying, actually.
It's just
Yeah.
like-
I'm sorry, to be honest, that's
Yeah,
terrifying.
but it's an absolutely
What do you mean that's
fascinating
great?
capture.
No, it's terrifying because,
Why?
like, I mean,
Why should celebrities
No, but it's
have
terrifying.
that kind
I'm
of
not saying
power?
that celebrities themselves are terrifying. The My Pillow guy is a sociopath. He's a liar and he's a crook in every possible way. And having that guy on your side is not the type of person that you want. It's like you're sinking and someone throws you a life preserver made of cement. I mean, that's like, do you want to grab onto that? I will say, though, that I do agree that it is a different calculation now in the kind of post-Trump world, that it used to be, let's gather all the celebrities. Let's do the thing, what was it the, I take responsibility. Does anyone remember this during the Black Lives Matter thing? And it was all these people
Yes.
looking in black and white going,
yeah.
I take responsibility for like
For my white privilege.
For being
Yeah,
white
yeah,
privilege.
yeah.
It's like that stuff now just doesn't resonate. And like in the post-Trump world, the thing that he's been quite good at, and of course Batya pointed this out quite a bit, is that, a bunch of very rich people who are completely out of touch with my life are supporting that person. Like, I don't care. Like, why do I want to vote who Taylor Swift is voting for? She has like a limitless amount of money and doesn't travel, doesn't walk out in the world without 17 bodyguards. It's just a different thing. It used to be when you had somebody on stage, Frank Sinatra coming up to support Reagan after being a Democrat his whole life. That was meaningful in some way. Now it's just the separation is, I think, too great.
But also, it's the class divide. It's not just these very rich celebrities. It's also 75% of hedge fund donors are Democrats. So Trump is now losing on a massive scale Wall Street, right? She's always bragging about how Goldman Sachs is in her corner, and that is totally true. 95% of donations made by people who work at the top 3 consultant management companies, Democrats.
But you
65% of people who make more than $500,000 a year now, Democrats. So there's been this total realignment, and every additional one of these endorsements from some astronomically rich person, it's actually an endorsement of Trump.
I know, but then you could argue, like, look at the vibe shift in Silicon Valley, obviously led by Elon Musk, and a lot
It's still
of other
72%. So it went from 97% Democrat to 72% Democrat. It's not quite as big as it happened,
Right.
but not quite as much as we think it did.
Right,
Feel like
but
it
I'm
did.
just saying, if we were trying to draw a bright line and explain the different coalitions, I'm not sure class is the right rubric. I think it's more about investment in the status quo versus people who are saying the status quo is completely broken, we need to blow it up?
I think we're agreeing, right?
Okay.
Because the people who like the status quo are the people who are comfortable, and the people who don't like it overwhelmingly are people who are struggling.
Right. Okay. But there's no way that you could describe Elon Musk, say, as struggling, or Donald Trump, say, as struggling.
Right. So the Elon Musk thing is very interesting. The first thing I thought when I saw him jumping up and down on the stage was,
oh my God, what is wrong with this
It's
person?
very interesting.
That's what I thought. but
It's
that's
very
just me.
interesting that China wants Donald Trump to win. I mean, right? Because Elon Musk is very close with the Chinese Communist Party. He certainly would not be imperiling his entire, the entire supply chain of Tesla is in China. So that was very shocking to me because I would have thought the opposite, that of course they want the Democrats who are softer on China to win. And so that really, I think, was significant for me. I think he's sort of an outlier because his interests are so transnational in this way.
Okay, that's going to be a really interesting story for after the election, depending on who wins.
Definitely.
All right.
All right. Up next, oh wow, this is going to be great. We have Abigail Shrier joining us. But first, a reminder to spend election night with us.
Do it.
God.
Do it.
3 of us will be hosting an amazing live show starting at 7 p.m. on
drink
Tuesday
during
night.
We will be getting.
It's
There
gonna
will
go
be.
all
There
night.
will be drinking.
There will be
games.
booze. Take a look at this
will be
lineup.
blood.
Where
There
on
will
cable
be
can you
blood.
find this mix of people? Please
Look
join
at
us.
that. Zoom
we
in.
want you to be there with us.
Unbelievable.
Frank Luntz, Frank Bruni, Anna
All the
Kasparian, Anna
Franks.
Kachian, all the Annas with one N and two.
Wow.
Catherine Herridge, Vivek, Nina Turner. It's like, it's a lot of misfits.
It's a
going to be
lot of weirdos. Yeah.
John
exciting.
McWhorter, Coleman Hughes,
Yeah, those are the normal
Abigail
ones.
Shrier,
Normal.
Elliot Ackerman.
Normal. Yeah.
Okay, it's
Hish.
going to be amazing.
Yeah, I mean, Frank Luntz, I'm very excited about that. We had him on during the RNC,
Yes,
right?
and he'll be calling in from West Point with a bunch of his students. Which
Oh,
will be
is
really,
that
really
right?
interesting.
Oh,
Yes.
because last time he called in and he was on with Anna from Red Scare, and he was like, "Is she smoking?" I was like, "Yes,
Yes.
that's the kind of show that we do. So we'll be smoking."
Do you think that I can get us a last-minute vape sponsor for the event?
Yes, if you own a vape company,
Please reach out.
Please reach out because I need new supplies.
Tips
too.
at thefp.com.
Yes, tips at the FP. All right. I want to welcome now, after this long build-up, the great Abigail Shrier, who's been on the show before. She's a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute and, of course, a contributing editor at the Free Press. Abigail, your investigation today about the anti-Israel indoctrination sweeping American public schools. We have a clip, too, so let's take a look at this clip from a meeting of the United Teachers Los Angeles, the main trade union of the LA school district.
One of the things that we can do as teachers is to organize. We just have to be really intelligent on how we do that. We have to know we're under the microscope. We have to know that Zionists and others are going to try to catch us in any way that they can to get us into trouble. So I help the students to organize. We go to those actions, and a lot of us here that have been to those actions have brought our students. Now, I don't take the students in my personal car. I have members of our organization who are not LAUSD employees. They take those students. And I just happen to be at the same place at the same time with them. It's like tomorrow I go to church and some of my students are at the church. Oh, wow, hey, how you doing? We just happen to be at the same place at the same time. Hey, look, we just happen to be at a pro-Palestine action, same place, same time. The students, they just so happen to want to organize a teach-in. And so students at our school, at your school, Maggie Lawrence, and several high schools now have organized their own teach-ins where they they inform other students about the genocide that's taking place in Palestine. What we do as teachers, of course, is to advise, to help. Naturally, this is a topic for most of our students who's pretty new, so we can help them, but we're not going to tell them what to say. But we can help them to some research and stuff like that. That's our job as teachers, is to educate them. So how do we do all of this without getting fired? That's the million-dollar question, right? And I don't know how in the hell we have not been fired yet, because I know for sure they have tried. But we have to organize. That's the bottom line. If they come after one of us, the district has to know that it will be a bigger headache for them to try to touch one of us than it will be to just leave us alone. That's the dynamic here. They have to know that we're organized and we are going to put up a fight, and they cannot get rid of us.
Sneaky.
Okay.
He almost got away with it too.
Yeah. So this piece that just went up at the Free Press is just an absolutely bombshell investigation, typical of the inimitable Abigail Shrier. I think we've called the piece the Kinderfada Revolution. And if there's been one big story since October 7th in terms of American education, it's been the story of the college campuses, which everyone saw students cheering for Hamas, setting up these illegal encampments, some of them getting arrested, often not getting charged at all. But what your piece today, Abigail, argues is that this is not just a college phenomenon, and it's not just an elite phenomenon in private, hyper-progressive schools. You have the goods to show that this is a national coordinated campaign across American public schools. I would love for you to talk to us a little bit about this piece, maybe starting with the clip that we just saw. What were we watching there?
We were watching California's largest local public sector union at a meeting. This is a 35,000 member union coming together to coordinate the activity of anti-Israel indoctrination of public school children starting in kindergarten. And they're specifically discussing how do we do it without getting fired. And this is a lot like what we saw and what I wrote about with the gender ideology indoctrination in the schools. It is the result of a coordinated effort. They are taking fringe ideas and they are absolutely indoctrinating public school children to hate Israel.
Abigail, how are they getting away with it? Because I think most people will see a clip like that and they'll say one of two things. One off, crazy guy, and they'll dismiss it that way, and I'd love for you to demolish that argument. And the second is, if this is happening, why are the parents not having an uprising against it? Can you contend with both of those claims?
Yes. So the reason that this is able to happen is because it operates through deception. Just like with gender ideology in the schools and the racism, we saw the anti-white settler colonialist idea that was pushed in the schools. Now you have the anti-Israel, Jews are the white, settler colonialist oppressors idea. It is being pushed in public schools. It's funded by a constellation of very radical anti-Israel groups. They are supplying curricula to teachers. And then there's a coordinated effort among the educators to deceive parents. They are shoving this stuff into courses like ethnic studies, but even math, art, science, social emotional learning. And we are seeing it all over the country. I looked at all kinds of states where this is being pushed. And in those, this is what I want people to know, in those schools where teachers are pushing this anti-Israel curricula and materials, again, supplied by radical organizations, where they're doing that, we are seeing intimidation, harassment, and violence towards Jewish students.
Before we get, I wanted you to tell some specific stories. I think they will shock people about what's happening to individual Jewish students. But just to give people a sense of how pervasive this isn't just happening in ethnic studies. You have this unbelievable, you have so many materials that are inside this piece. One of them is a pie chart that I'm looking at. I'm going to hold it up, even though people aren't going to be able to see it, because it's just so astonishing. This is a pie chart that was shown in a math class in a public school, in an elementary school in California. The chart is labeled People Killed Since September 29, 2000, and it is divided into Palestinians and Israelis. In other words, their way of teaching about, I guess, ratios or a pie graph is by showing number of people killed on both sides of this war. There was another example you include about a class at a Cupertino high school in which a physics teacher asked students to consider the effect of Israel's bombing of Gaza on climate change. Okay, so this is this is everywhere, which your piece shows. Talk to us about what happens to individual students living inside this reality, Jewish students, when this is the kind of sentiment that's coming at them from all different courses in their school career, some as young as kindergarten. What's happening to individual students? And maybe tell us the story of a young woman you write about called Ella.
Ella is one example of one young woman who was so thoroughly harassed during the course of a year that when she complained about it, when she brought a complaint, of the anti-Israel harassment. Her family was Israeli. She was so relentlessly harassed, not only by students, but by teachers, that the administrators decided not to investigate the bullying incidents, even though they had witnessed some of them. This young woman tried to sing a Hebrew song, Yesh B'Ahava. The song is "There Is Love Inside Me." This is a feel-good song, and she dedicated it to her family in Israel. This was at a talent show in which many students were singing songs from their ethnic heritage. She was pulled aside afterward and told that there would be a meeting about her song because it was offensive to people. And this went on all years. The Jewish club tried to put up posters of the hostages. They were torn down by teachers. I also tell the story of a 12-year-old girl who was chased through the halls by two boys, and who yelled they wanted to kill her. I mean, this was after a long period of harassment by her classmates. Her classmates referred to her only as Jew during the course of the year. When she was crying after October 7th in class because she still had family that she wasn't able to make contact with in Israel. This was the first day back at school after the October 7th massacre. The teachers told her she could only go to the bathroom to collect herself after she read a portion from his book, from his materials, celebrating the warm relations between the Palestinians and the Israelis and saying that they actually got along really well. So this was the kind of humiliation the kids have been subjected to. And yes, it's national.
Abigail, I mean, that's the question that I suspect people come back to of how pervasive is this. I mean, first of all, it's astonishing to see how incredibly dim some of these people are. This woman, Guadalupe Carrasco Cardona, who says they talk about anti-Semitism, but what they do is conflate, and I want listeners and viewers to pay attention to this. What they do is conflate. Part of that is by putting the star on their flag. Religion has nothing to do with it. This stuff is psychotically stupid. But William Shattuck, who is a teacher at John Adams Middle School, said, "We know that good history education is political education." That I haven't read a sentence that wrong in a very long time. How pervasive is that idea amongst people in the teachers union that their job is a form, regardless if it's Israel, is just a general form of political indoctrination? That's what they're tasked with doing for your children.
That's a very, very common sentiment among teachers today. It's all over the unions. And they're supplied, remember, teachers are given today, it's not like the old days where they had a textbook to read. They are now given broad discretion to teach materials that come from online sources. Many of them are supplied by very, very radical organizations. And there's very little oversight because, of course, children are accessing them through their computers. So it's hard for parents to even see these materials. So that's why we're seeing, I mean, when you see the explosions on campus, when we saw that, what we were seeing was something that had been baked in, and it started in primary school.
What are parents doing about this? Like the parents that find out that their child is being harassed, that their child is too scared to wear a Jewish symbol like Batya's necklace in school. What are they doing about it? I think we might have lost Abigail.
Did we lose Abigail? Oh, there she's back. Is she there? Is she frozen?
She's frozen. She looks great. Okay, Abs, we can see you.
Sorry.
Yeah.
No, I was asking you, what are parents doing about it?
Yes, I mean, right now there are grassroots organizations across the country that have arisen to deal with this in the last couple of years. But this mass indoctrination of public school children, which we have been witnessing for the past 5 years, is really something that took a lot of people by surprise. So really, moms have started organizations. They actually are grassroots, and they've been collecting and documenting this to try to make a difference and show it to school boards. So far, school boards are mostly ignoring them. And teachers unions are proceeding as usual. They are completely ignoring them, and there is no accountability. Teachers who are pushing these radical views in the classroom get no punishment. And even one teacher last year in California who was supposedly put on leave is back I was just told is back in the classroom this semester and was already having the kids draw as part of his art class, this is at Berkeley, was having them draw the cartoon depiction of Handala. That is the Palestinian symbol of resistance. That was this is the very beginning of school. That's their art project. And then he, concluded by saying, "Welcome to the resistance." This is what's going on in our classrooms. And there is, unfortunately, far too little pushback.
Abigail, I want our viewers to know that all of your work, as far as I'm concerned, what I can see, has been just massively devoted to your love of country. You started by exposing the horrible mutilation of children, and then your second book was about how we're making them mentally ill, and now you're talking about this issue so beautifully. My question is, in the clip we started with, that teacher seemed to think that there were rules on the books that made what he was doing wrong. And I guess my question is, how much of this horrible things that you're describing are actually against the rules and the rules are not being enforced, and how much of them are actually allowed and legal in terms of how the schools function and the unions and the teachers?
It's a great question. Something a lot of people don't know is that public school teachers actually don't have First Amendment rights in the classroom to teach whatever they want. It is tightly controlled. They are considered an employee of the state. It's the state speech. And the districts set the curricula, and the legislatures set the curricula. So if they wanted to fire teachers for teaching things that go against their curricula or aren't part of the curricula, they would be in their rights to do that. The problem is the school districts are either unwilling or do not want to punish teachers or correct them. So that's what we're seeing. We're seeing legislatures look the other way. We're seeing school districts refuse to enforce their own rules. And we're seeing teachers push a radical anti-Israel agenda. And the result of that is tremendous hostility and harassment of Jewish students in public schools in K through 12.
This is the kind of story that should lead to congressional hearings. It's called the Kinderfada Revolution. I recommend it to every person watching this. And if you know anything about Abigail Shrier's work, this will only be the beginning of a longer term investigative project. So Abigail, I know it's really early in LA. Thank you so much for joining us. Congrats on the Dodgers.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Abigail. All right. We'll be right back with Emmy award-winning investigative journalist Catherine Herridge, who has a bombshell report. We got a lot of those today.
Yeah, we do.
About a cover-up
outrage.
orchestrated by the Biden DOJ. Here's a little look.
When you received this email from your IRS supervisor after Hunter Biden's guilty plea, thank you for your commitment to the mission, which culminated in a great conviction.
Those are words that are not supported by the actions of the agency.
What you're saying is that within the IRS, there is disparate treatment of American taxpayers.
What they call is sensitive investigations.
But sensitive investigation sounds like code for powerful elite people.
There's a list in the Internal Revenue Manual that says what a sensitive person is, and it's exactly that.
There was no question in your mind the big guy was Joe Biden.
We corroborated that the big guy was Joe Biden, yes.
We knew that the laptop was real. DOJ knew that the laptop was real.
FBI knew the laptop was real.
There were a lot of overt investigative steps that we were not allowed to take because we had an upcoming election.
When we were doing the interviews, the prosecutors specifically told us that they didn't want to ask about the big guy because they knew it was Joe Biden.
You came forward as whistleblowers. Your information was accurate, yet you're sitting here today with us alleging that you've been punished every step of the way by the government bureaucracy.
IRS is just has a smothering blanket on me, hoping that I quit, that they find some way to terminate me or commit suicide or something.
And I'm up against a machine that has millions of dollars, that has the ability to fight me.
People have to have confidence justice is going to be administered fairly, regardless of who you are.
Catherine Herridge, thank you so much for joining us. Your latest story up on CatherineHerridgeReports.com reveals that federal law enforcement agencies knew the Hunter Biden laptop story was real, and yet they pumped the brakes on an investigation. Tell us a little bit about this massive, massive scoop.
Well, one of the things that struck me with the IRS whistleblowers is that you dial it back 4 years ago, and everyone was labeling the Hunter Biden laptop as a Russian plant. But what the whistleblowers told us is that in late 2019, everyone on that investigative team, so the IRS, the FBI, Justice Department prosecutors, they all knew that Hunter Biden's laptop was real. And really from that point forward, the IRS, Justice Department, they were tapping the brakes on this investigation. And they were blocked from taking very standard overt investigative steps like issuing subpoenas. And they were completely blocked from investigating anything that might have led to Joe Biden, but they said you could not ask about the big guy.
Who was doing the pumping of the brakes? Like lay out the because people are going to hear this and think this is a conspiracy. Like we're told a lot of conspiracies aren't true. This really sounds like one. Who were the people that came forward that we just saw in that clip, Catherine, that you have reported on, these whistleblowers? Who, like, where was the word coming down from?
Right. So the two whistleblowers are Gary Shapley. He was the supervisory special agent on the Hunter Biden case. And then Joseph Ziegler, he was the line agent or the case agent. He was really doing all the footwork in the case. And he was the one that found the lead that ultimately opened the Hunter Biden investigation. The pressure, the tapping of the brakes, this was really coming from prosecutors at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Delaware. They were telling them, you can't take standard investigative steps. We don't want you issuing subpoenas. We don't want you executing search warrants. You can't ask questions that might lead to the big guy prior to the election. Now, you can say, well, you know, there are prohibitions about taking investigative steps, overt investigative steps prior to an election. But as the case agent says, this was not a presidential candidate. This was only the son of a presidential candidate. So they said there was clearly a double standard, not only in the IRS and the treatment of this case, but also by the Justice Department.
Catherine, just to put it in context for people who might not know all the details of the case, one of the things that's most important to us as journalists and people who are observing the 2020 election and now is that the 50-odd intelligence officials that came out and said that the laptop was not definitely Russian misinformation, but could very well be. What you're reporting is that they knew this, and I mean, I think we've known this before, but they knew this well before that letter came out. One would presume that these people that were former heads of the CIA, et cetera, would know this information. And did you have any indication that they did know that information and went ahead with it just for purely political purposes?
Well, when you look very closely at that statement they released, they said it bore the classic earmarks of a Russian information operation.
Yes.
And what happened with a lot of the journalists is they kind of distorted that and they conflated it into it's Russian disinformation or it's a Russian plan. Yeah. And you make a very good point, Michael. What was known by the intelligence community, by the FBI, the IRS, the Justice Department at that time is that the laptop was authentic, and they almost known for an entire year because it was the cornerstone of the Hunter Biden investigations. So a former CIA director, for example, these people are plugged in. They could have made some calls to figure out like what's the word on the street with this Hunter Biden laptop. But it looks like they just didn't. They just signed on to this letter at the behest. It looks like Secretary Blinken was the one who really got the ball rolling on it.
It wasn't just, you know, if I'm sort of like casting my mind back to the time when everyone was talking about the laptop, there was not just a silencing of the kind that you're reporting on in this latest story inside the intelligence agencies. There was a silencing on the part of anyone that was curious inside the legacy press. You have spent your life inside organizations like CBS, Fox News as a reporter. You've only recently gone independent and you're crushing it. Can you reflect a little bit on your time inside CBS, or if you want to speak more generally about the way that the legacy press responded to stories like this that were sort of inconvenient to their chosen political ideology?
Well, what I would say about the Hunter Biden laptop story is that I was assigned that story from the very top of CBS, George Cheeks. So this is someone who runs news, entertainment, and then also the sports division. And I was told it was a very high priority for the network. What I didn't anticipate is that executives beneath him, show producers, didn't have the same appetite for the story and didn't understand this whole concept of speaking truth to power, and holding both sides of the aisle, the left and the right, accountable. So my experience with that story is that while at the top there was a real desire to lead with solid reporting, there was a lot of resistance at the lower levels, and particularly on the Hunter Biden laptop. I eventually reported on that for CBS News in 2022, late 2022. And what I would say on that point is that anyone who knows me knows it doesn't take me 2 years to authenticate anything. This doesn't take me 2 years, and I'll leave it at that.
Right.
Yeah, and also to point out that as journalists, we know that the corroboration, which was presented to the average news consumer as this very difficult task, that all one had to do to get the ball rolling was look at some of those emails, contact the people who got those emails and say, did you send this email? Is this you? And they would say yes, and you say, okay, this stuff is authentic. But Catherine, I mean, this story right now, I know there's people that say, what does this matter now? At this point, why is it relevant? It's an interesting story looking backwards, but what do you say to people who ask that question?
Well, I think that this story matters because it's about the public having confidence in these institutions that are the cornerstone of our democracy. You want to have confidence that the Justice Department, the FBI, the IRS, that they're going to treat American citizens fairly, and there's not going to be disparate treatment depending on where they are in society. What we learned in our investigation from the IRS whistleblowers is they say that there was disparate treatment of taxpayers at the IRS. That if you were someone like Hunter Biden and you were under investigation, there were all of these additional approvals that investigators had to get. But if you're a local business person, they were able to go full bore on an investigation with no additional approvals. Same with the Justice Department. If you had someone who's connected to a presidential candidate, there was a lot of tapping of the brakes. But if an average person, or you could argue leading up to this election, Donald Trump, there hasn't been the same tapping of the brakes in that case. So it's about having consistency, having confidence in our institutions that people will be treated fairly. And just if you can give me one more sec, I also think it's relevant because when you look at what happened in October of 2020, there was a complete suppression of this story on the platforms. And what we know now is that the reporting was accurate. And so this, I think, really is the beginning of this conversation about free speech, free press, censorship on platforms, and where you can truly have free speech in this marketplace.
I mean, I think what's so amazingly damning about your incredible report is that you are showing how the Department of Justice, the IRS, the mainstream media, and social media all colluded with the Democratic Party. And if I am an average American who's not on board with that, where do we go from here? I mean, what is we believe in building things, right? We believe in restoring trust. How do I tell an average person that they should trust these institutions after a bombshell like this, Catherine?
Well, I think the question is there's a larger question here about the change in the marketplace. When I lost my job, I got terminated by CBS in February. I took some time to educate myself about the marketplace, and I saw that there's really been this tectonic shift in the way that Americans are consuming their news and information. I was lucky to spend some time with Bari talking about her experience and sharing sort of what she saw as the next chapter in the new horizons here. And you can't argue with the numbers. The public is really flocking to these new platforms. They feel that these are platforms where they can be the judge of the facts and the truth, and that they've got the the skill set to do that. They don't have to rely on big corporate media to do that for them. I'm not saying corporate media disappears. Corporate media, I think, will always have a seat at the table, but we see these diversity of voices coming up on the platforms, the free press, and there's just a bigger marketplace, and there are now more seats at the table, and Americans have more choices about where they get their news and what they consider to be authentic, reliable information.
Catherine, last thing. I know you're always working on a lot of stories. Want to give us any hints about what's next for you?
Let's see. I've been working very hard on a story related to Afghanistan, maybe of interest to you at the Free Press. I have very, very strong, solid reporting about Al-Qaeda terrorists taking a page out of the October 7th playbook and doing training in Afghanistan with ultralights and paragliders. And a very senior Al-Qaeda operative went to Saudi Arabia recently to get funding to develop a weaponized drone capability. When I took this information to the intelligence community sort of press offices, frankly, I got a big yawn. And what I know through my context is that the system is really starting to blink red in Afghanistan in that kind of pre-9/11 way. And I don't think it's an accident that we're seeing this evidence of terrorist training like October 7th, because that was such an effective and lethal attack from the point of view of Hamas. And to think that that skill set and those tactics would not be brought to other arenas like the United States or US targets in Europe, I think is extremely naive.
Wow. I can't wait to talk to you about that story, and I'm going to text you about it right after this.
I will be standing by.
All right, well, you can
follow her everywhere.
You can find her stuff at CatherineHerridgeReports.com, but I am going to, with the boss next to me, take it upon myself, Catherine, to say, no, Catherine Herridge Reports, come over to the Free Press.
Yes!
Let's just merge it. Let's just be independent together.
I didn't put him up. I did not put him up to this. It's a long burn. We got to seduce over time.
We got to seduce.
You can also follow her on, I guess we call it X, on Twitter, and just always a pleasure to talk to you, Catherine, and so impressed.
And we'll
with
see you
everything
next week. We'll see you on the election.
See you on election night. Can't wait.
Catherine Herridge on election night. Thank you so much, Catherine, for joining us.
Bye.
See you soon.
All right, I gotta say thanks to Bari for joining us too. Because if I don't say that, she will fire me. So thank you, Bari, for joining us. But when we come back, we're going to have the Free Press's own Coleman Hughes. In the process of doing that little switch, let's take a look at a trailer for the next installment of our great swing state debate series, this time in Ohio on the economy. And check out our YouTube channel for all the episodes.
4 kids. It's a lot to feed. I know what it is to put $500-600 in your fridge every week.
Do they really care? Do they really know what we're going through?
When Donald Trump says, if you were to strike, I'd fire you immediately, that's a huge red flag to us.
Red flag.
I think one thing Donald Trump's done a good job about is recognizing the harm that globalization has brought.
It's just a scary thing to sit there and watch someone with $1 million home and then watch 25% of my community starving.
I don't know what the solution to greed is. Church?
And I'm a retired journalist who is now a farmer, and I subscribe to the Free Press. I'm in central North Carolina. We do beef and hay and sugar-cured meats. We have a couple of big gardens, things like that. I am a Free Press subscriber because it represents traditional journalism ethics and practices. The viewpoints are diverse, the writing is good, and that represented to me a level of competence that's sadly missing in today's journalism. My favorite writers at the Free Press, Coleman Hughes, we like his stuff. Anything with his name on it, we'll read. Of course, the new writer, Neil Ferguson, I really enjoy his stuff and looking forward to his future writings. I subscribe to the Free Press. You can too at thefp.com.
That was Keith? All right. Well, that was Keith the farmer, whose favorite writer at the Free Press is guess who? The man sitting to my left, Coleman Hughes. Coleman has a new piece up at the Free Press now. The headline is How the Democrats Rigged the Vote in Puerto Rico. Coleman, I'm going to pull up this piece here because this is, you talk at the beginning of the November 5th, we're all going to the polls, and then say, there is, however, one group of U.S. citizens who already know their vote will be rigged. Who are those people, and what on earth are you talking about?
Yeah, so those people are the 3.2 million American citizens that live on the island of Puerto Rico. Their vote is rigged because 2 years ago, House Democrats passed a bill calling for a status referendum in Puerto Rico. There have been many of these referendums, 7 since the 60s, and it's the biggest political issue on the island. They don't really care about Democrat, Republican so much as they care about should the island of Puerto Rico be a state, independent country, or a commonwealth, which is this kind of territorial status, this in-between status. And
the
so,
desire for independence is always very low, right?
Very low. It's
Yeah.
never gotten more than 5%, only because American citizenship is really prized throughout the country.
What's the
How my
percentage
grandparents were able to come here, for instance.
that wants the status quo?
It's always been really neck and neck between Commonwealth status quo and statehood. So Commonwealth won in 1967 and 1992 and 1998. And ever since the 2000s, it's basically been on a knife's edge between statehood and Commonwealth. And independence gets single digits. And then there's this other complicated thing called sovereignty plus, which is like not really real, but gets between 15 and 30% sometimes.
Sovereignty plus.
Yeah, it's this.
That sounds
it's
like
this
a
kind
plan.
Of lie.
Yeah,
it does,
like a T-Mobile plan or something.
It's similar to that in that it's
Lord.
basically a scam.
Yeah.
Because it's this option where, without getting into it, it's just basically have your cake and eat it too, be an independent country, but also have ironclad U.S. citizenship. And every time the Department of Justice is like, that is not a thing. It's the definition of being your own country is that you will not be U.S. citizens. But there's a lot of huckster Puerto Rican politicians that try to sell this as a kind of have your cake and eat it too option.
Okay, so how did the Democrats rig it?
So basically after 2020, House Democrats introduced a series of bills calling for the first time in history for a referendum that mysteriously omitted the status quo Commonwealth option. They've never done this before. But obviously, it's no secret that Democrats believe they would benefit from Puerto Rican statehood because they think it would add 2 permanently blue senators, several more.
Sure.
And they may be right about that, but they certainly believe it. And so they passed a bill through the House. It didn't make it through the Senate, called the Puerto Rico Status Act. And it called for a referendum with all 3 options: statehood, sovereignty plus, independence, but no Commonwealth option. And the pro-statehood governor of Puerto Rico, Pedro Pierluisi, took this to the Puerto Rican people and said, these are the options they're giving us. These are the only legal options. I'm calling a referendum for November 5th that has no Commonwealth options.
Where was that supposed to have gotten stopped along the way? Should he not have done that? Because, like, what I'm trying to figure out is, we use the word rigged a lot, right? And it does seem like no law was broken. A process was followed that, from a kind of moral point of view, seems to us to have omitted something extremely important. But did they actually do anything nefarious legally?
So the Department of Justice, I don't think this would count as breaking a law, but the Department of Justice has not approved this referendum because it does not include the Commonwealth option. The DOJ only approves of referendums on the island that include all of the options, which makes sense because what's the point of a referendum if you are taking away the what is tied for the most popular option? Really, the whole point of these referendums is to decide between statehood and Commonwealth, so you can't take either one off the menu. I don't think it actually violates a law, and there was actually a law passed in Puerto Rico in 2020 that allows the governor to bypass their legislature and call referendums on his own. The pro-statehood party in Puerto Rico has a history of influencing and manipulating these referendums, but Democrats have never participated in it, and it's never been done this blatantly where literally what has won half the island in the past is just not on the menu to be voted for. And the way they've justified it, both Democrats, like AOC, who co-sponsored this bill, and the other, Puerto Rican and Hispanic politicians in Congress, and the pro-statehood parties, by saying the current status quo is inherently colonial, therefore Puerto Ricans only need to choose between their so-called non-colonial options. And they don't really need to choose themselves. We've already chosen for them that they don't want Commonwealth. Which is, of course, it's contradictory because if really Puerto Ricans don't want Commonwealth, then you would have nothing to fear from putting it on the ballot, just like you have nothing to fear from putting independence on the ballot, right? Because they know independence isn't going to win.
And there's a lot of people in Puerto Rico who are descendants of colonizers themselves.
Yes, yes.
From Spain.
Yes.
So, okay. The question I want to ask you about Puerto Rican politics in general is something that Americans tend not to pay too much attention to. But if the idea of statehood was approved by the people of Puerto Rico, the kind of complexion of American politics, you say it would add a couple of blue senators. I mean, I was thinking back of the governor of Puerto Rico, Luis Fortuño, back in 2010-11, who was like celebrated by libertarians because he slashed government in Puerto Rico by 20-odd%, and was at that point, I think his downfall is slightly different. But there's a conservative streak there, right?
Definitely.
There's some like, you know, Republican types in the old school Republic. Does it mean if you kind of were to incorporate Puerto Rico into the United States as a state, that it would just be a kind of island of liberals or island of Democrats? I mean, what is the kind of political mix in the context that Americans would understand it?
Yeah, so that's the thing. In Puerto Rico, the two major parties, they are not Democrat and Republican. It's all about the status issue. And in fact, there's a funny paradox where the right-wing party in Puerto Rico is the statehood party, whereas the left-wing party, which would align more with Democrats on most issues, is the anti-statehood party, whereas Democrats support statehood. So it's kind of crisscross. The right-wing party there is conservative on like gay marriage and LGBT issues, and so for instance, the current resident commissioner, who is their non-voting representative in Congress, is a Trump supporter, even though she is of the pro-statehood party. And it seems like a total contradiction.
Someone should tell AOC, you know, it might not. If they vote
AOC's
on the referendum, will it immediately start the process of creating?
No, it will not. No. Although the bill passed through Congress was asking for a binding referendum, so they were.
But that failed.
It failed.
Okay.
And what's happening is a non-binding referendum because they can't do a binding.
symbolic.
Yeah, it's symbolic. But what Democrats want is to point to this. If ever they do have control both houses of Congress and eliminate the filibuster, they want to point to this and say, Puerto Ricans have spoken, they want to become a state, we don't have to ask again.
Genius.
Right? Yeah. And no one knows enough to know that they actually took the only other plausible option off the freaking ballot. But to your question, I've seen numbers as high as like 40% of Puerto Rican voters are unaffiliated with Democrats or Republicans. So I do think Democrats have a kind of slightly overconfident assumption that Puerto Ricans
We've seen that a lot with Hispanic voters, which is a term I don't really like using, but Hispanic voters, I mean, and one of the reasons I asked that question is this idea that they'll always be part of the coalition and you ignore these people for a very, very long time. And again, it's a very disparate group of people, and I'm kind of interested in people who think that Puerto Rico, if included as a state, would just be a stalwart democratic state.
Well, going off that, can we ask you about the other thing that made Puerto Rico be in the news this weekend? Are you comfortable talking about that?
Yeah, you had some pretty harsh tweets about this.
It's very relevant, I feel, to the point Michael just made, which is the misperception of how first of all, tell us your reaction to that tweet about Puerto Rico being, the joke about Puerto Rico being, you know, floating garbage, and also, do you think that Hispanic voters are likely to take that as an offense, or do you think they're sort of likely to chuckle, laugh it off, and I mean, do you think it's going to have an impact?
Yeah, so my view is that if a joke is funny, it doesn't matter how offensive it is, it just goes down smooth. But if the comedic timing isn't right, then suddenly you feel all the offense. And it's a very unfair position comics are in, but it's also their profession. I think Tony Hinchcliffe, I've never been a big fan of him. I've seen him live, and I feel his jokes often aren't funny enough to justify how mean they are. And this is obviously what happened. You saw even Trump's crowd recoiled from the joke. They went, "Aw," instead of laughing. And so as to whether Puerto Ricans will care, I mean, I have to think some of them will. I don't know if it's decisive, but generally people don't like having their homeland insulted, especially if the joke isn't really funny. Like, I think if Dave Chappelle or Louis C.K. made a really mean joke about Puerto Rico, every Puerto Rican would like it because it would be a really well-crafted joke and undeniable and funny. But the combination of a poorly crafted joke plus the insult, I don't know. Look, I really don't know if anyone's going to change their mind at this point, but it's certainly not strategic. I think even Trump felt he kind of distanced himself from it. So, it's certainly not smart.
But as a Puerto Rican, as a half Puerto Rican, you don't find it funny?
I would have found it funny if it were a good joke.
That's the correct answer. I was just looking for the correct answer, and I was just leading you to it.
Oh, I mean, there's a million things you can make fun of Puerto Rico about. It's endless.
I would recommend people look at Colin Quinn's special, New York Story, where it has a whole section about Puerto Ricans, which is very, very funny. Not mean, it's loving, but it indulges in a lot of stereotypes. Coleman, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Check out Coleman's piece over at thefp.com. And you got a lot more coming, so, right?
Yep.
All right. But
Thanks for having me.
We'll see you
Thanks
soon.
so much
All
for
right.
coming.
I'm not going to shake it because I don't like it that much. All right, we're going to speak next to the Free Press's
out.
Peter Savodnik, who I like more than Coleman. That's actually not true. I'm just trying to create trouble. But first, let's take a look at this clip from Honestly's Ben Shapiro in Sam Harris debate on
So good.
Trump versus Harris. If you haven't seen it yet, make sure to check it out at thefp.com. I have been listening to it. It's very long, but it's really, really good. So check it out.
Lose sight of just how not normal Trump is as a candidate. I mean, I think, Ben, if I had told you 10 years ago that you would one day support a presidential candidate who bragged about owning a teen beauty pageant so that he could barge into the dressing room and ogle naked underage girls, right? I don't think you would believe me, right? Or if I had told you that you would support a candidate who, as president, had been denounced by almost every four-star general who worked under him as a dangerous moron, right? I don't think you would believe me. Or a president who had inspired an assault on our Capitol, directly inspired it. I mean, as much as you want to parse what he might have said in that initial speech, there's no question he called everyone to D.C. and inspired what amounted to be a riot on the Capitol. And he inspired this. I mean, we had people wearing Camp Auschwitz T-shirts and flying a Confederate flag, smearing shit on the walls that Abraham Lincoln built, right? That's what happened on January 6th. And if I told you that you would support this guy and still support him, a guy who has honored these people, right, who stood by as they were calling for the hanging of his vice president, he just stood by tweeting narcissistic bullshit. And he would later record a song with some of the worst offenders, right? There's 20 of them in prison singing on jailhouse telephones. He recorded his own track on this song, and he plays it at his rallies, right? If I told you you would support such a person, you, Ben, right, you with your commitment to morality, right, and religious principles, and public probity and ethics, I don't think you would believe me. But that's where we are, right? That's how fully Trump has distorted our politics.
And I think that the same could be true in reverse. If I had told you, Sam Harris, a few years ago, that you'd be supporting a candidate who says that men can be women, for example, or a candidate who has openly campaigned with, say, Mark Ruffalo, who has compared Israel to the Nazi state, or that you would be supporting a candidate whose first action in office, apparently, according to the New York Times about 3 days ago, was to examine intelligence reports for gendered language with regard to America's foreign adversaries who are female. You'd be surprised, too. I guess all this is to say that we've entered a magically different world, for better or for worse. I think in many ways for worse, and I think you'd probably agree on that. But that world exists. And so now you're faced with a binary choice between candidates, and that binary choice cannot be avoided.
Guys, seriously, go watch that debate. It's incredible. And now we have the Free Press's own Peter Savodnik. We love you, Peter. Thank you so much for being here. Your story is out today, and it's about two towns that you say symbolize a broken America. You have Flint, Michigan, and then East Palestine, Ohio. And we have some pictures we'll put up on the screen. The women are in East Palestine, and that is an abandoned middle school in Flint. Peter, I was reading your piece coming into the city on the subway this morning, and it really broke my heart. It was so incredible how you put these two stories side by side in a way that now seems so obvious, but nobody had thought to do before. Walk us through the significance and, you know, the kind of racial class story that you're telling here that I think is not obvious to everybody.
Thanks, Batya. It's been 10 years since the start of the water crisis in Flint, Michigan, almost 2 years since the train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio. We're just a few days from this election, and both these places have come to represent these very powerful forces in American politics. Systemic racism, which is talked about endlessly on the left, and the plight of the white working class, which fueled Donald Trump's rise to power on the right. And I was really interested in looking at how these two forces or ideas really weave together and how they amount to, in many cases, two sides of the same proverbial coin.
Peter, on Flint, just to kind of set the table here, I was going back to this when reading your piece. Can you just give us a sense of, you say it's been 10 years, and I can't believe it's been that long. I was like, good Lord, I remember when this story came out. What about that story 10 years hence was true and what wasn't? I mean, because it became such a potent political issue, and particularly when it was viewed through the prism, as you point out, of race and of sort of environmental discrimination, which was a term that was used quite a bit. When you look back at this, is like, at the end, was the general idea that we had about actually true? Was that like largely true?
Yeah, that's in many ways the question. So I think that what happened is that a lot of powerful, mostly Democrats, really Democrats, starting with Hillary Clinton, turned this into a matter of race. They swooped into Flint, and they highlighted the fact that Flint is now about 60% Black, and it became a matter of sort of the structural racism that had led to the poverty there and to the kind of lead in the pipes there. And I think that what that obscures is the fact that the very long, sad story prior to the water crisis is actually what leads to the water crisis. It's the decline of the auto industry. It's the story told by Michael Moore. It's the story of what has happened to countless towns, hamlets, across the American hinterland. And so I think, was race a part of this conversation? I think probably, yeah. Like there's no doubt about that. And when you talk to people there, you can sense a sort of like this there's a palpable anger about sort of like why it took a year and a half, for example, for the government to react to what amounted to brown water that they were showing up at city council meetings with. Why was it so hard to get people to do things? But I think that, so yes, there is this question of race, but beneath that is this much bigger, deeper story of decline and economic deterioration that has made Flint, like East Palestine, forgettable in a very sad and awful way.
I mean, isn't the subtext I'm getting, and maybe I'm imposing my own biases here, but is that, it turns out the story of East Palestine sort of disproves the racial narrative, right? I mean, it sort of gives us this lens that, if the majority of the residents of Flint had been poor whites, they would probably also have been ignored. I mean, isn't that sort of the lesson that we're learning now, and, as the wheel turns? And also, what would help the people of East Palestine and the people of Flint is obviously the same thing, right? I mean, a kind of a class-based politics that started treating poor people and working class people like they weren't garbage, would help both of those communities, no?
Yeah, but I think that's correct. I think that East Palestine does illustrate or make clear that this is really not about race. This was not about race in Flint. It's not about race in East Palestine. But I also think it illustrates something which is more troubling, which is that it does not matter how much a president, a candidate, a party runs on the sort of the cause of, sort of this or that disenfranchised group. We're talking about really, really big, deep structural issues, economic issues, these tectonic forces over which Washington, the parties, any one president have almost zero power. And so what they can't say, what Donald Trump can't say, what Barack Obama can't say, what no one can say is there's actually not much we can do to help you until you start making something that the rest of the world wants to buy. And that's I think the very sad sort of place that Flint and East Palestine find themselves in now, whereas they were once, the very, very important parts of these national or global economies, they're now cut off from them.
Can I just push back on that just very briefly? I mean, just but So what would be your explanation for why the people of East Palestine love Trump and feel very much that he is committed to improving their lots, whereas I haven't been to Flint recently, but I can imagine that there's probably not a lot of enthusiasm there for President Obama at this point.
Actually, no. So the same kind of tribalism persists in both places. In Flint, they love Harris. For the most part, outside of Flint, they not so much. But in Flint, there's a lot of support for Harris. In East Palestine, there's a lot of support for Trump. And I think that like there's a certain political inertia. There's a certain kind of tribal impulse, a racial cultural impulse. Both groups are sort of drawn to their respective candidates because of certain cultural political affinities. And both those candidates know how to speak to those audiences and get them excited or make them feel remembered. But the reality is that what the Trump administration shows, I think, is it doesn't matter whether you have a lot of really dedicated, thoughtful people in the White House who care a lot about the plight of the white working class or the working class or whatever. That's very nice. That's good. But these problems are much, much deeper than that. And they're not going to be solved in the course of a quarter or a year or a few years. This is about something that's going to happen over a matter of, decades or generations.
Peter, thanks so much for joining us. I mean, it's a great piece. I mean, this is reminded me reading this of FDR talking in 1932 about the forgotten man. This is Peter's forgotten man piece. And I was going to ask you at the end about the political ramifications of this, and you just depressed me. It's like, yeah, no one can fix it. Thanks, Peter. Thanks for telling us nothing can be done. Amazing.
Thank you so much,
really appreciate it.
Thank
But
you
thanks for being here. Always pay attention to Peter's stuff. It is always good, and also always good is this show. But it's over. Sorry, you got to go home now. You're probably at home, but we're going home. So thanks to Bari Weiss, Abigail Shrier, Catherine Herridge, Coleman Hughes, Peter Savodnik, good Lord. All of us, and from the two of us, thank you for joining us. And make sure to mark the calendar for our live coverage. You have to mark the calendar. It's election night. Just make sure you watch us, because go cast your vote. And then come tune in, because it is going to be pretty impressive. The lineup is amazing. So we'll try not to screw it up and get too wasted, but I can't actually promise anything. But if you haven't already, go to thefp.com and subscribe so you don't miss anything. And we will see you next time.
See you next time.